Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Rooney. I'm the Marketing and Content Specialist for your BBB. Thank you so much for joining us over the lunch hour here. Before we get started, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Nakota Nations, the Métis Nation, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Thank you. As I said, today's session will be recorded. Your name will not be shown in the final recording. Please feel free to turn your cameras on, but there's no pressure. And please turn your microphones off unless you are speaking. And please use the chat to communicate or ask any questions as we move forward. BBB is proud to host this event with Accredited Business, Wendy Ellen, to bring all of our accredited business together to learn and network. Okay, next slide. Oh, hang on here. I just gotta get my next slide here. Thank you to our trust sponsors, Johnson Inc. and Peregrine General Pest Control, as well as our in-kind sponsor, Wendy Ellen. We will pop contact information for each of our sponsors into the chat. So without further ado, let's jump in. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here. Perfect. So Wendy is a human resource professional with 30 years generalist experience and president and principal consultant for Wendy Ellen Inc. Wendy formalized her firm in 2005 and has been growing since. Her firm works with all the industries based in and around Western Canada and US affiliates. Wendy is on the board of the BBB and enjoys working with small to mid-sized businesses in Alberta, nationally, and globally. Wendy is co-author of the book, The Only HR Best Practice You'll Ever Need, a grassroots and practical approach to what leaders and HR teams often overcomplicate dealing with their people. So take it away, Wendy.
Thank you very much, Julia, and I will share my screen. Assuming everybody can see that okay. So I'm thrilled today to be here with a couple of colleagues of mine, Jolene Kober from Evolve Ergonomics and Dan Frederick from Claritech Solutions. So we're tag teaming this. We'll start with me and carry on with Dan and then Jolene. So I have the chat box open. I'll try and monitor questions, but of course there'll be time for questions at the end. But if you do have a question that I'll try and keep my eye open on it as well. So starting out, I want to throw a few stats out there that I've collected through probably May on. So the Canadian HR Reporter is a leading magazine across Canada, all to do with HR, mainly Canadian, but also some US-based information. So TELUS International found 51% of their American workers felt less connected working from home. 57% of workers missed the small talk and interactions of working in the office. 53% definitely missed the collaboration. 50% miss the separation between home and work, which is a very interesting one because working from home does increase your flexibility around how and when you work and that sort of thing. But what they're finding is it's a real gray line, and you never really leave the office when your office is at home. So that I've heard it coined work-life integration now as opposed to work-life balance, and it's really how you're integrating both of those worlds into one day. M-Train, which is an HR training company, said the trust in leaders fell 12% while working from home. 77% of all workers felt culture would never be the same. And part of that is attributed to the Zoom meetings, where basically the Zoom meeting starts, you have the business discussion, and it's over. Everybody goes back to their day. More stats, a Leger poll from May 31st of this year. 82% of Canadians who worked or are still working from home during the pandemic say their experience was positive. When it comes to returning to the workplace, those that have worked or are still working from home, 40% of Canadians, 33% of Americans would prefer working a mix of a few days a week at the workplace and a few days a week at home. And I highlighted that because that's really what we're going to talk about today. Only 20% of Canadians and 19% of Americans want to stop working from home and go back to their workplace entirely. So 35% of Canadians, 39% of Americans that are still working or worked from home agree that if they were basically ordered back to work, they would start looking for another job. And I've heard that in amongst my clients as well. Few more. March 2021, a work relocation company, Caprello, found that 87% said being able to work remotely would be a part of their future employment decisions. So companies really need to start thinking about a hybrid model. Another report published by Robert Half, which most of us know, in April of 2021, it says as many as a third of workers may quit if they were asked to return to the office full time. And it's even a bit stronger with working parents. So the number of employees likely to leave their job if remote work is taken off the table completely is higher among working parents. So an April 2021 survey conducted by FlexJobs found that 62% of respondents said they would quit their current job if they can't continue to work in some shape or form from a remote office. So this has become, I think it was a great thing that came out of the pandemic, understanding that people do get their job done, they're productive, they can work from home. Yet I think there's a lot of things that have been missed. So the hybrid, is that the answer? I think in a way it's kind of the best of both worlds. And I think for probably the majority of organizations, it could work. Obviously, there's some jobs that just can't be done at home. Couldn't during the pandemic and wouldn't be able to necessarily during a hybrid consideration as well. So some of the things, people kind of band-aided the situation during the pandemic when they had their workforce at home. Some people did really go ahead and really formalize policy around working from home, but I found the majority of clients that we worked with and things I read, it was really a band-aid situation. So if you're going to go ahead with a hybrid work model, you really need to set some clear expectations or policy around it for things like work hours, for example. So how many days are you going to be expected in the office? How many days can you work from home? Is that flexible, or do you need to schedule those days? So there's going to be a lot of questions about that. I've talked to a lot of clients where it's going to be 3 days in the office, 2 days flex. So obviously you can't have everybody at home Monday, Fridays. So how are you going to structure that work week amongst your teams? Are you going to be able to rotate? That's going to be a decision that a company is going to have to make. Because of course, most people will try and put their at-home days around a weekend. In-office days, is it going to be your whole company expected to be in office during that time? Departments, teams, what does that look like? I think office space is going to determine that a lot, because as we've all read and heard, that office space, people have been letting office space go during this pandemic, probably thinking that they would go to a hybrid model. So, I would recommend that you would definitely need some time where your teams are together. Hence the previous slides where people have thought that their collaboration has suffered. So I think there will be time, you need to get your teams together. Availability. So when you're at home, and this was a problem during the pandemic that companies faced. So what was the expectation around availability? Are you expected to be available during core office hours? Is there some flexibility to that? So what we found is if this wasn't clear, that's when problems started. Expectations around childcare and other distractions. So that stat that we go back to parents working from home. I don't think that really means that when you're working from home as a parent, that you're part-time child caring and part-time working. Like there still has to be some boundaries. Yeah, maybe your daycare's around the corner, the commute time's not as bad, that kind of thing. So I think that also, even though sometimes it's a white elephant in the room, I think it has to be addressed. And same with other distractions at home. I was just joking that my dogs always start barking and get, when I'm on a call. So what's the expectation around that when you're on your home days? things like, oh, what's your home office look like? Do you actually have an office? Or are you sitting on the kitchen table? So some of those, for the 12, 14 months that we were doing that, people could get by. But is that the proper way to have an office? Probably not. And I think Jolene's going to show some examples, but there's some really funky modular shed type home offices now that companies are doing that sit out in your backyard. Under 20K, I think, is a lot of them. So that's another whole interesting piece, people making businesses out of this now. How do you maintain the culture? So, we've all heard of the team building social hours, the online murder mystery games, those kinds of things. Those are great. They'll probably continue, but if you have actual team building in-person activities, are they now going to be mandatory? Are they not? So I think you really need to think about and put some parameters around those as well. Time tracking. There's some systems that the minute you log into your computer, it's tracked. It goes to the central server where your managers can find out how often you're online, that sort of thing. What's that going to look like when you're not necessarily at the office? Response time to email, phone, instant messaging. Had a lot of our clients say, I don't understand, people are working from home, so they really should be able to get their phone or answer their emails, this kind of thing. Yet they haven't. So what's the expectation? Is it, like I said, around availability? Are you expected to be able to respond immediately? If you're off for a walk, do you have an hour response time? So some of that stuff really needs to be addressed before it turns into, in some cases, a performance issue. Communication policies and systems. So how are you going to communicate? Do you use Slack? Do you use Teams? What's your communication method? And is it going to be the same for people that are in office, at home? And what's the frequency of the touch points there too? So I think the whole communication policy needs to be looked at. And I just bring up key projects and deadlines. This has been a bit of an issue with people working from home, and it could get better in a hybrid model if the teams are brought together once or twice a week, or it could get worse if you have some people at home working on deadlines, not being able to talk directly to the people in the office. Some of that project scheduling and deadlines may get lost in between the people working from home, the people off site. So I think some of those project management details need to be looked at from remote versus in office, and how do you communicate on those? And I think there needs to be more frequent touch points as well, which kind of brings to the last point I have there on scheduled meetings. So are you going to have a morning, I think it was Maria talking about their morning huddle. Are you going to have a morning huddle just to find out where everybody's at? Who's in the office? What are you working on? Those should really be literally a huddle, like 10, 15 minutes. Otherwise, once again, we're into more meetings, which, by the way, people have said there's been way more meetings when you're working from home than in person. And I think part of that is you can't just go next door to the office. So some of that really needs to be looked at. We don't want to create meetings when we don't need to. So what's the length, and do we have an agenda, and is there a real point? So all that stuff where we kind of limped along probably the last year plus really needs, if you're going into a hybrid model, you need to sit down and think about all these and put probably a guideline policy around the hybrid model. Permanent home office considerations. So I look at that graphic, and there's probably a few of us that are working that way. So, especially if you don't have a door, how do you protect the confidentiality of information? I think most things are online, a lot of things electronic, but I do have things I've printed off sometimes, and there's some businesses where they do have sensitive documents. Are they sitting on your desk for whoever to come by and glance at them? The other thing is employee privacy. I mean, right now you're looking into my home office, I'm looking into Julia's home, and do we need to be concerned about that? There's been some legal situations or concerns about that when you have, people walking by behind you, that sort of thing. So do you enforce putting screens on your filters on your camera? Those kinds of things I think need to be taken a bit more seriously at this point if you're going to a hybrid model. Physical file storage. Once again, most things I think are online, but there are some physical file concerns. And do you have them in a milk crate under your desk, or do you have a proper cabinet for them? a locking cabinet, which is my next point. You need to respect the security of documentation, fire hazard, all those things that we sometimes probably didn't think about for the last few months. Equipment, I have a few screens, and I know, people that work in the geology engineering field, project management field, they work off 2 or 3 screens. So that's great when you're in the office. Do you have that same layout in your home office? Because that will affect productivity. So making sure that you have the tools to do your job. Office supplies is an interesting one. So when you're at home, are you responsible for buying your own office supplies? Can you take them from the company stock room without looking like you're taking supplies? So, that kind of stuff that was really not thought about, they do add up. So that needs to be something to discuss. Kind of going back to equipment, shredders. So, what do you do with the documents now that you want to get rid of? Do you have a shredder at home? Do you rip it in a few pieces, or do you take them to the office? Another consideration is safety. What does your company's WCB cover? So, and I haven't, to be honest, I have not seen any legal cases on this yet or challenges, but if someone's injured at home while working, where does that leave the WCB for the company? So I think those kinds of fine print needs to be looked at around WCB. And I have a line there on ergonomics. Jolene's going to cover that, but workplace injuries, I have heard, and she'll cover that, have been up simply because people don't have proper office setup at home. Another one that needs to be brought out into the forefront, and I think once again, people limped along last year's expenses. So, working from home, even air conditioning, if we think about the past week or whatever. So you've got your internet, you've got your equipment costs, you've got your cell phone, whether your company covers it normally or not, and you've got your utility costs that are going to increase with someone working from home. So I think the conversation needs to be there. How are those going to be covered, or are they? If it's your choice to work from home, does that go along with that choice? We've seen flat amount reimbursements in more the form of an allowance, which is taxed, of course. So we've seen that. We've seen pure reimbursement through an accounts payable, which then, of course, is not taxed as such, depending on how that is done through the accounting system. We've seen companies allot a certain percentage of home expenses. And then there's the T2200, which is a tax form that you can write off your expenses through your tax form, and your employer has to sign that. And then this past tax year, there was that, I believe it was $400. It was a flat amount that the government allowed for people for a tax write-off during the pandemic. So all that needs to be considered. If someone's working at home 1 day a week, what is that worth, and what is the cost to that? Hot desking, I mentioned that companies that have downsized in size and are going to a hybrid work model, how are you going to accommodate your team? And hot desking is a big concept now. Dan's going to talk a little bit about that from the technology standpoint. But I think there's pros and cons to both. Pros is you get to mingle with different workers. So you come and you don't have a set. If you don't know what hot desking is, you don't have a set spot. You come, you plug in, and that's where you're going to do your work for the day. So I think it does promote a bit of that collaboration between people, breaks down some of the silos for sure. A lot of times it allows for more natural light. There's not the barriers of, usually the barriers of half walls or office walls, that sort of thing. And it's typically more casual. So there's a lot of pros to hot desking. Some of the cons, I think, are, it's non-personal. So unless you want to come like Mary Poppins and unpack everything on your hot desk for the day, it's pretty non-personal. You're not expected to leave the photos of your cat, put it that way. It can be noisy, of course. Confidentiality, if there really isn't any, if you have documents that you have on your desk. And I think a big concern about hot desking for the near future is going to be around sanitation, making sure the stations are sanitized. Are you sitting too close? What is the spacing? Is there plexi? Whatever that looks like. And I think, looking at what's gone on in Alberta and Calgary, that is going to be a business decision. So those things are going to have to be considered, and how do you make those decisions? And then once again, storage. So storage for belongings, like it's the winter, boots, coats, those kinds of things, your bag with your whatever you bring to work. So it's those considerations, pros and cons in hot desking. I'm going to leave it on the last little piece I want to talk about, which isn't really part of this, but I've had tons of questions on it, is the transition. So what's that transition potentially going to look like from either full people working from home to either a hybrid model or back to the office? So I've already had questions from my clients. What about, and I call it the holdouts, what about people that are still I don't know if I feel safe coming back to work, those kinds of things. And so I think in most cases, you can show that your office place is a health and safety and safe place to work. Alberta's kind of been deemed that now. So I think for most people and most organizations, your organization will be considered that. So everything I'm hearing and looking at, if people are adamant about not coming back to work due to COVID, there will probably have to be a medical reason for that. PPE. I think most businesses are still going to supply PPE for a long time, and people who want to use it, use it. I think you'll find far more containers of Lysol wipes, all those kinds of things. So I think be prepared to keep that PPE supply up. Vaccinations, I think I might just leave it at that. It's such a contentious issue. You've got some businesses saying, I want double vaccine, I want proof of it. And there's a lot of questions on what you can mandate, what you can ask. Bottom line to what I'm hearing, if people want to volunteer that information, it's fine. But the minute you start having different rules, it's going to be obvious who's vaccinated and who's not. So there goes the privacy. Some of the legal considerations and legal opinions I've had is leave that alone for now. It's probably not going to be an issue with the number of people in your organization or in the office building that are vaccinated. So that one is not going to play out until it's played out in the courts. And the closest thing they're looking at is the flu shots, and there's just not the severity of the flu that they saw with the pandemic. So that's a real gray area. The other thing about future legal considerations and concerns is those people that have not been vaccinated, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. And I've had a client, this has happened already, harassment, bullying against those individuals. So it's really going to be important for you as a business owner or a leader in an office space to keep a real pulse on what's going on and what the conversations are, and making sure everybody respects everybody's choice. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I now want to introduce Dan Frederick, who will take over the next part of this presentation. Dan has a bachelor's degree in engineering and an MBA from the University of Calgary. He's president of Claritech Solutions, a managed technology services provider that's been successfully helping small businesses in Calgary for over 20 years. Claritech guided its clients through the transition to working from home during the pandemic, dealing head-on with issues of security, remote functionality. Dan is currently rolling out a large hot desking solution for one of its clients, enabling them to enjoy the benefits of working from home while returning to work. So I am going to unshare my screen, and Dan will be able to share his.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, so I'll be talking about the technology implications of the whole return to work model here. So I'll just share my screen. I assume you guys can see this. So I've got 4 short slides here that talk about kind of the different technology implications. And the first one should be no surprise. It's all about security. One of the biggest risks is now you're working with people that have their own personal devices in a lot of cases. So if people are working from home and they're using home computers to remotely connect to office systems, you have to keep in mind that that introduces the whole home security threat. Users are typically not as security conscious when they're at home. Kids can be on computers. You could have various antivirus implications. So there's all kinds of things like that that need to be considered. So best way to manage the risk is to actually provide the hardware to the staff. And typically that's in providing laptops. We've had experience with providing kind of cheap remote access laptops as well as desktop replacements. And we're kind of leaning towards desktop replacements right now, and we'll talk about that in the hardware section. One of the other things that is highly recommended is user security awareness training. So that'll help them with their home internet access and their use of the internet, as well as at the office to prevent phishing and ransomware, that kind of thing. Multi-factor authentication and VPN are also key pieces of technology that can help secure the network. So if you're logging in with only username and password, consider that to be at risk of a breach. So second on the list is hardware. As I mentioned, the best value is usually with a desktop replacement. So that's a laptop that's capable of performing all the tasks that a typical desktop would do. So it's got the horsepower, the memory, the disk space, and all that you don't need to have a desktop anymore. One of the reasons that it's useful is that it's the same piece of hardware that they're using at the office and at home, as well as it reduces the costs of licensing. So there's a lot of the software products, you have to license it per device. So if you've got a laptop and a desktop, you're paying double in those licensing costs. For docking stations then, the biggest challenge that we've seen is that some devices, the newer laptops are coming with USB-C. Those are the little ports that you typically have on your phone. The nice thing about USB-C, you can see in the picture there, is that you only need one cable and it provides the power as well as connectivity to all of your devices. So it's one connection, it's a standard connection across all the laptops, and it makes it simple and easy for the users. They can keep their power supply at home, and when they come to the office, they just connect that one cable and they have access to everything. The one challenge is that legacy devices, like we've seen laptops that are as new as 2 years old that don't have USB-C. So if you're going to try to provide a hot desk solution that supports all of your laptops, you really need to have a hybrid docking station that can support USB-A as well. So that's kind of the old square connection that everybody's familiar with. Hot desk cubicles are useful because they can save on office space. You can have more than one user sharing the same cubicle. So the biggest thing with that is to make sure that those docking stations can support multiple laptops and have all of the equipment that a user is going to need without them having to carry it around with them. So mice and keyboards are an interesting one. We're recommending people have their own mice or their own mouse that they would keep in their laptop bag. And that way, at least they're comfortable with their own equipment on that side of it. Keyboards are a little bit harder to carry around. So the hygiene is going to be the important thing with keyboards. On the software side, there's a lot of interesting things going on. Teams and Zoom have really made big progress as far as the last 18 months. Outlook has introduced a concept called workspaces, and you can actually book cubicles through Outlook in order to reserve your hot desk for the day or for a week, that kind of thing. And so there's an entire ecosystem that Microsoft has built just around workspaces. So you can find workspaces in buildings, on floors, with floor plans, the whole works. So if you're interested in looking into that, it's all available through Office 365 on the back end. On the security side, endpoint protection is the big thing. We recommend standardizing that across the company. So even if you do decide to include home devices in your remote working strategy, it's important that you treat those home devices as part of the corporate network and get buy-in as far as endpoint protection goes. So my final slide is all about access control. So you have to decide how you're going to provide access to the network through remote work. So there's a bunch of different tools. We recommend a virtual private network or a VPN, as well as multi-factor authentication. So that's typically where you use like a Google Authenticator or a Microsoft Authenticator that is installed on your phone and prompts you to make sure that you have in possession a device that allows you to access the network. Without that, with only username and password, if somebody was to get a hold of your username and password through either a phishing attempt or just sharing credentials, that provides a security risk to the company, and you can't confirm who's actually connected. There's plenty of other remote access solutions that we've used over the years, and it can be useful in certain situations, things like TeamViewer or LogMeIn or Go to My PC. Those are all acceptable in certain situations. A lot of companies will outlaw that use of technology because it does provide somewhat of a risk to the IT department. But in limited situations, it can be really useful, especially for emergency use and short-term use, that kind of thing. So that is it for my presentation. I will turn it over to Jolene. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I will introduce Jolene. So Jolene Kober is the CEO and lead ergonomics consultant of Evolve Ergonomics Consulting, Inc. As a physiotherapist and ergonomics consultant, Jolene's extensive experience over the past 18 years provides her clients an advantage in ergonomic prevention and management of work-related injuries. She has helped her clients and their employees pivot their workplace through this work-from-home period to help minimize injuries. She has also introduced an online strategy and management platform to help clients directly address the ergonomic issues of a hybrid workplace. She's excited to share her insights with you today. Over to you, Jolene. Are you still muted, Jolene?
Sorry about that, of course. Dan, I need your help. Just want to share a bit of an ergonomics perspective to the new office or the hybrid work model with you today. So I'm going to kind of take a step back for a second, and I want to look at, kind of a bit about what happened. And I mean, we call this the grand work from home experiment. And I love the quote, do what you can with what you have where you are. And it really reflects this season of working from home that we have been in over this past year and a half. And from that, we've learned a lot about how we work from home. We've seen the upsides as well as the downsides. I mean, the upsides, great, short commute, less expenses, it's saved time. And for some people, it's brought about a good work-life balance. For others, work-life balance is a little bit trickier because it's harder to have that balance in place when your work is always there, or you're needing to spend extra time to get things done because of distractions during the day, etc. So there are some downsides. And some others are difficulty in focusing. I don't know if any of you have kids at home during the pandemic when you had to work and manage that. It's extremely difficult. It's also lonely. There's lack of community, even though we're having those Zoom meetings and other types of social online interaction events. It's still isolating in some senses. And then multi-user workspaces. I alluded to kids being at home, but, some of us have had spouses, partners at home working in the same office space. And so that's been very tricky. So all of these things have really taught us about what we kind of value with our workspace. And now looking at this whole return to work process, I'm calling it the grand return to work experiment, because now we're looking at more hybrid model and having a bit of the best of both worlds. And I think, when I look at the hybrid model and I look at it from, what Wendy shared and what Stan has shared, and now what I'm sharing, it's extremely messy and it's very complicated. And I think every organization is going to have their own tailored piece to how they make this work. And I love this quote from Thomas Edison is, I've not failed. I found 10,000 ways that it just won't work. And I'm not going to go into a lot of statistics on this. I know Wendy shared some of them, but when I'm looking at the ergonomic research and the global research of hybrid work models, they found that 72% of organizations are going to go to this type of model. The really interesting statistic I thought was that only 2% were going to solely go to home office and get rid of the corporate office. And so that was surprising. So it was kind of neat to see that the greater majority is going to look at this hybrid model, but only 68% of leaders actually had a plan in place. So if you haven't started planning, it'd be good time to do that. And Wendy talked a bit about, some of the trickiness around, a policy or plans of working days. How many days are you in the office? How many days are you at home? And that's going to be, I think, one of the hardest pieces to try and figure out, because you're going to need to have meetings, whether it's in person or including those who are virtually not there. So that's going to be a really, tough piece to figure out going forward. And so I think having open communication with employees on the hybrid model and connecting with them to see even how they're working, how they plan on working, what different teams or business units are how are they best able to work with this hybrid model, and then encourage communication between groups, between your organization, that we're trying to figure this out, and that any type of feedback you can give us on what's working, what's not, is really important. And then taking those pieces and then implementing them into how you're able to implement the hybrid model and creating sort of this like new normal, right? So I want to get into a bit of the ergonomics of all this, and there was really interesting research that came out, and when they surveyed Canadians, ergonomic discomfort was one of the #1 challenges of working from home. And over the last year and a half, I've seen everything. But the biggest pieces are awkward postures. As people are still sitting on dining room tables, not sitting on dining room tables, but the chairs, and, standing or working from an island, on a couch, on their beds, they're sitting on balls, all kinds of different things. And it's leading to some really poorly supported postures, but also static postures, and holding those postures for long periods of time, or those positions, or getting stuck on that couch. And that puts a significant strain on our bodies throughout the workday, especially, if we're working some longer hours. Technology is another piece of the issue. Dan's alluded to some of the security side of things and the components. Making sure that you have external screens and not getting stuck on the laptop screen. Oftentimes I'm seeing when people are using smartphones, they're, wherever they're inputting, usually you've got head and neck issues where you're viewing where you're inputting. So that's another piece of the puzzle. And then lastly, lack of movement. And, when I talk to people who work in home offices, there are a few that say, oh, I move more, I go for a walk at lunch. I think that's really great. But I would actually say that a greater majority of people aren't moving enough, and there's less movement than there even was before. People aren't commuting, they're not standing on the C train or walking downtown or to their vehicle. They're not getting out for the coffee or going down the hallway to chat with, co-workers. So there is a significant lack of movement out there. And I would chance to say that that is a big piece of mitigating your risks for injury. So I'm always encouraging clients to move more throughout the day. We chatted a little bit about some of these challenges, working from home. Wendy chatted about, who is responsible for the home office and equipment. And that is a really sticky piece. When everybody went home, people went home with the laptops, some type of technology device so they could at least be connected. But what about the chairs? What about external monitors or keyboard and mice? And so every company that I've worked with have viewed this very differently. Another piece of this, in speaking with benefits providers, they have noted an increase in short-term and long-term disabilities over this past year and a half from working from home. And, if you talk to anyone who's a physio, a chiro, or even physicians, there's a huge amount of musculoskeletal injuries that are going on right now, and to a greater severity than before because of poor workplaces. And I think that's going to have implications for WCB down the road in that, we haven't quite seen those challenges yet, but when the home office was designated as your primary workplace, that is a really tough thing to get out of from a corporate standpoint. So it's really important to make sure that you're helping your employees have a healthier workspace, and that you're trying to prevent those injuries. Especially from this past year and a bit, employees are more acutely aware of their physical concerns, especially after working in their poor workspaces. And I think we're going to start to see some of those issues crop up as people come back to the office, because employers are able to control what's going on in the office. But I think people are going to come back having those aches and pains already existing from their home office, and they're going to have to address it from the corporate workspace, but also the home office as well. I want to touch on a couple other little quick things about the home office. And I like this cartoon because it just shows the lack of separation of work-life balance and all this, and that, you spin around your chair and you're like, oh, I'm home from work, great. So making sure you have that dedicated workspace is really important. I know Wendy talked about these modular spaces or modular offices that companies are starting to build. There's one in Calgary for sure. I think this is from a Lethbridge company, which it looks gorgeous, although they'll run you about 35 plus grand. So it's a little bit of a hit to the budget, but you can see this guy here needed some specific workspace, and he's got great airflow and lights. Definitely an interesting choice, and I don't know how that is long term, but definitely trying to find that space where you're able to focus and concentrate is really important. Another piece of the home office is the furniture, and chairs is, I think, one of the biggest things that they've shown helps increase employee productivity. So making sure that your employees in their home office have a good adjustable chair. I'm seeing all kinds of things still, like I mentioned earlier, stools to dining room chairs, all kinds of things. So those are pieces that you're going to want to address going forward. The other thing is equipment. Dan mentioned moving to desktop replacements, laptops, Surface tablets, but also making sure that you have external screens for those. because I'm seeing a lot of head and neck, upper back issues, and then wrist, hand, and forearm from, using those laptop keyboards and, not having an external keyboard that's a little bit wider, a little bit more specific for people. And then also the mice as well, and making sure that they're able to maintain a neutral wrist position. So those are some of the pieces around the home office, but I want to talk about stipends because I've seen a lot of issues with this. There's like the Shopifys or the Googles of the world who said, oh yeah, we're, going to give you $1,000 for your home office. And, even companies within Calgary, $500 here, spend it on your home office. And I've had people tell me, oh, I bought a coffee maker, maybe some lamps or other things. Or they go out and they get that, Costco chair. But I'm seeing them 6 months later when they're in pain and we're having to recommend a different chair or some other different types of equipment, and that money is gone. And that I don't think is the best use of, or maybe the best way of supporting your employees. I chatted with the CEO and had an interesting conversation because I think she really got it. She said, I look at my workspace and I've got most of what I need, but I know I have employees who don't have a proper desk and maybe need a chair or external monitors. And she goes, I'd rather spend the money where it's needed as opposed to just throwing money at the problem and not really solving the issues. And so that's where we started to come up with an online tool to almost act like a survey to help employees with their home offices, but also figure out what is needed as opposed to just what is wanted. And that's something to really pay attention to, if your employees are going to be working from a home office going forward. So what about the corporate office? And, just want to touch on some of the trends and the types of spaces. From an interior design aesthetic perspective, a lot of corporate offices are looking at their spaces and trying to design them to be more homey, for lack of a better term, but more comfortable. We have some smaller meeting spaces, more flexible spaces, cafe spaces where people can connect and go through work, but have them be more comfortable and more appealing to them. And that's the biggest thing, is if you can appeal to your employees and get them excited about coming back to the office space, I think that's going to be a huge win for a lot of organizations. Dan talked about hot desking and touchdown type spaces. And oh my goodness, there's a lot of concerns around that from an ergonomics perspective. If you're going to have these types of spaces for individuals when they're coming into the office, because you've done a survey and you realize I only have 80% or 60% of my employees in the office at one time, so I don't need all these dedicated offices. So you move to hot desking. The biggest thing is to make sure that that equipment and that furniture is adjustable. And that you educate your employees on how to adjust them. I can't tell you how many times I meet with people where it's this grand epiphany when I adjust their chair because they never knew that their chair adjusted in that way. So, make sure that you're giving them the tools on how to adjust for those spaces. Dan also mentioned that, having a mouse that people carry with them if they're going to use hot desking spaces, I think is key, but having those docking spaces for the external monitors and potentially the keyboard as well. And there are some options for having portable keyboards as well. So that's something to consider too, especially if there's an individual who has had repetitive strain injuries in the past. They're going to be more likely to re-injure if things aren't set up properly for them, especially if they're using hot desking. The next area is collaboration. And I know some offices are thinking, oh, great, home offices are for focused work and our corporate office is going to be for collaboration only. And I think you'd be amiss if you did that. You need to make sure that you're also having focused workspace So when individuals do come into the office, they have that ability to do that task-based work and not have those external interruptions from a hot desking space. Just touching back on collaborative spaces as well, it's really important to make sure that there is equal representation for individuals who are in office for a meeting versus coming or joining in from a virtual side of things. And you can kind of see this middle one here where, you know, they've got a second screen or monitor or TV there that allows those people to not be minimized when the presentation goes up on the screen. And so they feel like they've got a better representation, and even the individuals who are in the office collaborating, that they're connecting with them equally as well. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind. And there's a lot of new technology that's coming out that is allowing that to occur. The last point, BYOD, bring your own device. And so many organizations are expecting employees to be bringing their own device to every meeting, wherever they're going, whether it's virtually or in person. So how do we make hybrid work from an ergonomics perspective? Well, education is your biggest tool in helping your employees minimize their risk of injury. And that can be done through webinars or programs or self-assessments, online tools that really empower them to make sure that they're adjusting their workspace to fit their body structure and work for them. The next thing is, equip them, give them the physical tools they need to work productively, whether it's, an adjustable chair or an adjustable surface or even keyboard and mice. Adjustability is key, especially when you're looking at those hot desking surfaces. Don't forget about focus and the fact that employees, when they come into the office, are going to need those spaces where they're able to just really dedicate their time to what they're working on and not have interruptions. And there's a lot of research that's going around on respect of employee time and when they want to have that dedicated focused time. So that's a neat piece that's starting to come out as well. And then, from the technology perspective, create an equal playing field between in-person versus virtual employees. And then the last point is I call it equal ergonomics, but the standard of ergonomics and equipment and furniture that you have in your office should really be the standard that is also occurring in the home office as well. I can't tell you how many employees I've met with that say, our office is really dedicated to ergonomics and having a great workspace, but when we all came home, they did nothing. And, I've seen it time and time again, and it's really hard for employees to wrap their head around that. So I think more emphasis needs to be placed on the home office and making sure that it gets set up properly to help support employees. So I just want to leave you with this last quote, and really, I think education and prevention really is a pound worth of cure, especially with going forward with the hybrid model. So just want to thank you for joining us today. And on behalf of everyone, myself, Wendy, and Dan, thank you for having us present. And we'd like to open it up for questions.
So there were a couple questions that popped up in the chat. One of them was during Wendy's presentation. Wanda was just wondering who's typically responsible for buying equipment and furniture.
That's a really good question, and I think it's going to be individualized to the organization. I know for this past time during the pandemic, it was basically all over the place. So some offices shipped their desks from the office home, some gave an allowance to purchase some equipment, but I think kind of back to, if this is a hybrid model, is going to be a permanent fixture in your organization, you're going to need to set those boundaries. And the other thing, businesses may think that if you want to work from home, then you should be responsible for paying for that. But I have a feeling there will be some sort of what I kind of think will be an allowance of some sort.
Yeah,
Great.
that's kind of what it was the go forward more point that I was interested in, because this really puts existing businesses at a disadvantage from, say, like startups, the ones that have got 5-year leases and just plow $250,000 into improvements. They don't have this. Yeah, this is an interesting that we're looking at.
Yeah, for sure. Just a couple more here. Lynn says, I can hyper focus for way too long in my home office. She has a blow up Cairo cushion for quick stretch breaks and a foam pillow, so she can stretch and stuff. But she's wondering if anyone has any other suggestions, like how to move or keep your ergonomics from being too bad during work.
There's some great smartphone applications for both Apple and Android. One is called Desk Fit, and I love it. It's unobtrusive. It doesn't like pop up on your computer screen and interrupt your thought process. That's a great application. You can even tailor it to what you want it to remind you to do. Stretch, breathe, go for a walk, all kinds of things. That's a great way reminding you to move. I encourage everyone, don't sit statically for longer than 20 to 30 minutes max, and try and stand up for a quick 30-second micro break. Lots of research on how that's minimized risk of injury, and surprisingly, you're actually more productive and less fatigued at the end of the day. So keep that in mind. There's some great applications out there for that.
Great. Yeah, Lynn said she does set an alarm to force a quick movement break, so that's great. And then one more here from Laura. She says, if working in the office, do you see businesses taking a larger role in ensuring air quality, corporate washrooms, entrances, kitchens, and common areas are more stringent as far as infection control?
I don't know if it's Jolene, me. I think, I'm not sure about air quality, because in most cases that's a bigger issue in the building side of things. But I do think that yes, it will be more stringent around sanitation, cleaning up. I mean, things like I'm hoping the gross, disgusting microwaves will be kept cleaner, those kinds of things. I think this has just heightened everybody's awareness on the importance of hygiene. And although I think back to the H1N1 where, there's sanitation everywhere, and then, a year later you go to use hand sanitizer and it's empty. So who knows what the longevity of that will be, but I think in the near future for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with what Wendy said. I think the sanitation levels that have been created hopefully will continue. I know there's also a lot of research going on in the furniture ergonomics world on surfaces and the types of surfaces and how long viruses can stay on a surface. Polyurethane's your best type of surface. I think wool, I think it was like 24 hours. Like if you sat on a wool surface, that the virus was, after that 24 hours, it was gone. So there is more research going on into materials and that side of things as well.
Great. I don't see.
Sorry, I have a question. It's Maria.
Yeah.
I think this one's for Wendy mostly, but just from a hiring standpoint, we're seeing a little bit of movement around. Do you think employees will pick companies based on now their flexibility or, how they have structured their work? Because most of us have become very accustomed to working from home or having that flexibility, a little more life-work balance. Do you think that will be a bigger choice now when people are moving and making a choice to move to another organization?
Yeah, 100%. And if you look at those stats, it is. I mean, I think it's the majority of people that will be looking for that hybrid or flexibility when they choose new opportunities and will leave. I mean, we can say that we'll leave their job at right now the job market's not super great. So I think,
Yeah.
you know, when the job market picks up, that is going to be a big consideration of a lot of people. We've got people that have abandoned the cities to go work in smaller communities. So even now, you know, one of the big recruiting things that are being talked out there is your recruiting pool is, if you offer that kind of flexibility, is way larger than it was before, because you can hire somebody who prefers to work out in Canmore and only commute to the office maybe twice a week or whatever, whereas before you were looking in the Calgary area or someone that's willing to relocate. So I think, yes, make a long story longer, I could keep going, but yes, I think that's definitely going to be a consideration.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Great work for Dan as he tries to connect everybody via internet in the mountains and
Awesome, thank you.
That's great. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat, and just being mindful of time. Sorry, I have dogs barking now in my background. But yeah, thank you guys so much. That was super informative. And thanks to everyone who joined us over their lunch hour. I hope you enjoyed it.